Today, we are diving into a really powerful idea that's reshaping modern education. We're talking about the culturally responsive classroom. We're going to explore what it really takes to build a learning environment where every single student doesn't just, fit in, but actually thrives.
So let's just start with a big question, one that kind of frames this whole conversation. What if good behavior isn't some universal one-size-fits-all thing? What if it's actually shaped by culture, by family, by a student's personal experience? This is the core idea we're digging into today, how seeing the world through our students' eyes can fundamentally change everything in a classroom.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to start with a whole new mindset for management. Then we'll get into 4 super practical strategies: getting to know your students, diversifying what you teach, adapting how you communicate, and finally, partnering up with families. All right, let's jump in.
First up, the mindset shift. And honestly, this is the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. It's all about moving from a classroom management style that's focused on control to one that's all about connection.
And this slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? The old school model was about compliance and control, basically getting students to follow the rules, period. But this responsive approach, it's totally different. It focuses on creating a real community, one that's built on inclusion and mutual respect. It's a huge shift from just managing behavior to actually nurturing students as people.
So what do we even mean when we say cultural responsiveness? Well, at its heart, it's about actively recognizing, honoring, and celebrating the unique background that every single student brings into the room. The goal here isn't just to tolerate diversity, it's to see it as a fundamental strength of the classroom.
And that leads us perfectly into our very first strategy, which is, without a doubt, the absolute bedrock of a responsive classroom, taking the time to truly know your students as individuals.
But okay, how do you actually do that? Well, the sources give us some fantastic practical tools. You could use things like cultural inventories to learn about traditions, or just do regular informal check-ins. You could assign projects like family heritage interviews. Even a simple step like learning and using a few key phrases from your students' home languages sends such a powerful message. It says, "I see you, and you belong here."
All right, next up, let's talk about the curriculum. Because the books we read, the histories we study, all of it sends a really powerful message about whose knowledge and whose stories we think are important.
This quote really just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. When students can see their own cultures and their own experiences reflected in what they're learning, they feel seen, they feel validated. It tells them that their perspective matters. And that, right there, is a massive driver for engagement and, you guessed it, positive behavior.
So how do we put this into practice? It's a 3-step process. First, you've got to intentionally include resources from a wide range of authors and perspectives. Second, and this is so important, try to use authentic resources, materials that were actually created by people from the cultures you're studying. And third, teach students to be critical thinkers. Guide them to look for bias and to always ask that question, whose voice is missing from this story?
Our third strategy is all about communication. But listen, this goes so much deeper than just the words we use. It's about understanding all the subtle cultural influences on how we interact with each other.
Just think about it for a second. Simple things that we might take for granted, like making eye contact, how close we stand to someone, even certain gestures. All of these can have wildly different meanings depending on a student's cultural background.
Okay, let's take eye contact. It's a perfect example. In a lot of Western cultures, if a student avoids eye contact, a teacher might interpret that as being disrespectful or maybe disinterested. But in many other cultures, avoiding eye contact with an authority figure is actually a sign of deep respect. You can see how, without that cultural context, it is so easy to misinterpret a student's behavior.
So what do we do? How do we adapt? Well, instead of demanding eye contact from everyone, a teacher could look for other signs of engagement, like nodding along or taking notes. It's also incredibly effective to just offer multiple ways for students to participate. Maybe they're more comfortable sharing in writing, or in a small group, or using a digital tool. It's all about honoring those different communication styles.
And that brings us to our final strategy. And I gotta say, this might be the most essential piece of the puzzle: partnering with families. Because let's be real, they are a child's first and most important teachers.
The key here is to use what's called an asset-based approach.
This means instead of seeing families as people you just call when there's a problem, you see them as true partners who bring a huge wealth of knowledge, strength, and cultural insight to the table. They're a resource, not a hurdle. So how do we make that partnership a reality? First, we make communication easy and accessible, using calls, texts, email, whatever works. Second, we provide things like translated materials and interpreters to remove language barriers. And maybe most importantly, we work with families to set shared goals for their child, drawing on their values and their unique perspective.
So when you bring all of these strategies together, the mindset shift, knowing your students, diversifying the curriculum, adapting communication, and partnering with families, it all points to one simple, powerful goal: creating a classroom where every single student, no matter their background, feels seen, feels valued, and feels genuinely ready to learn.
So, we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Whether you're an educator, a parent, or really just anyone who's interested in this topic, what's one new way, just one, that you can start learning about the world that the young people in your life come from?